All right. Hi, I'm Tasha with the Bay Area chapter of the Goretti Group, and I am so excited to be interviewing Jordan Pacheco of the Glad Trad podcast. Jordan, I want you to introduce yourself.
Ooh, wow, put me on the spot. No, I'm just kidding. Hello to your wonderful audience. My name is Jordan Pacheco. I am one of the co-hosts of a podcast called the Glad Trad podcast that I have with my good buddy, Rudy Carlos. And we are both traditional Latin Mass Catholics. That has been the way that Christ has had the faith really rejuvenate our own walk with him. And on our podcast, we're just a couple of jabronis, really, but we talk about a lot of different topics and themes inside, particularly trad Catholicism. Our motto is Risus et Bellum, laughter and war. So we range topics on bad music, sacred architecture, but we also do kind of the more fun side. So we talk about Catholic pipe smoking and memes. And lately, Rudy and I both become married, and Rudy's become a father. So we've been doing a lot of, in particular, men's issues and marriage. And I managed to drag my wife onto a podcast. So we really are just kind of showing that that trads are normal people, even though we do sometimes have a mad trad section, but that, you know, the way we can tackle some issues in the church is by smiling at it a lot of ways and just having a good time.
Thank you so much. So let's just start with a quick Hail Mary, and then we'll get into it. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Saint Joseph,
pray for us.
All right, so Jordan, today we're going to be talking about dating, courtship, marriage, Latin Mass, all of those topics. So can you tell me, how did you meet your wife?
So I knew that Genevieve existed in the ether. And when I say that, I mean, before I met her, I was doing a show with her sister. I was the camera operator, cinematographer for their podcast, which was called Bread with the Sisters. So one day I was packing up, and her sister was like, "Hey, Jordan, so who do you like?" And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I was very clear that I was pretty much married to my camera. So I met Genevieve. I didn't know it was her at first, but I met her at a Latin Mass put on at University of Southern California. The Norbertine Order of Southern California decided to do it. So, you know, amongst all the people who were there, it was Genevieve that I remember. She doesn't think the story is real, by the way, but I remember being pews up without my glasses, and I just knew that there was a girl just pews back behind me that I thought was pretty. And I couldn't really see her, but I knew that she was pretty. I liked her. And then right outside the steps, we met. And from there, you know, we saw each other again months later at my own home parish's little picnic. And I said, I either have to ask this woman for a date or get a rejection. But I'm not doing this whole months of Lady Dulcinea infatuation. So I asked her to coffee, and she told me that she doesn't drink coffee. She actually drinks tea, which I do too. So it looks like that was good. And one thing led to another, and we began our courtship in August. We're engaged by December, and off to the races we went. So.
And when did you guys get married?
So we got married 4 months ago. We got married on June 5th, 2021. So we've been together a total of 2 years. We had kind of a longer engagement because I got a job back home in Colorado. And so she moved out. I want to say with me, but I want audience to know that cohabitation is a mortal sin. So not with me, but alongside me. And then we got married in June. So.
Okay, so you dated from August until about December, or?
Yep, we dated for 4 months, and honestly, by month 2, I was like, "Yep, this is the one." So we decided to, you know, settle down.
And then you guys so you were engaged for about, what is that, 6 months?
Oh, I see. So we got engaged in 2019. We were going to get married in 2020, but a combination of the pandemic and moving out here and stuff, we thought it was just going to be a little easier if we just elongated it. So we were engaged for just a little under a year and a half, that means.
Got it. But a short dating period and then like a longer engagement.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Now, did Father Ripperger's 4 stages of courtship influence your dating style at all?
Yeah, in a little bit of a ways, only in really the broad strokes instead of some of the specifics. So I'm sure if your audience hasn't heard, Father Ripperger has a great talk on courtship, and he breaks down what courtship is, as well as kind of some of the stages, if you will, of courtship. courtship for us, as we talk about it on our show, really boils down to dating with the purpose of being married, especially since dating, as we think of it, is a relatively modern invention. Chances are your grandparents and your great grandparents didn't have a car to get saddled up on. They probably knew each other in the families, and then one day, as my grandfather did, he just kind of looked at my grandma and was like, "Well, I might as well get married." So, so for us, there was, in the broad strokes, on date 3, when we made it official, we both sat each other down and we just spelled out what we wanted. We were both looking for marriage. We were looking for a traditional kind of Catholic sort of route behind the marriage. And we also essentially gave each other our histories. We made sure that, there was complete trust and openness, and that we all both knew what we were getting into, where we'd been, where we're going, and that sort of thing. So Father Bitburger's talk was really good. If there's one thing, if I remember it, and I don't remember all of it off the top of my head, but I do know that he talks about kind of how to pursue a woman as a man, like to call up her father and ask her for the first date. I don't quite know how practical that is in my situation. Certainly at the time wasn't practical anyway. But now that I'm married, and now that I've kind of seen what engagement and courtship look like, I see that marriage is not just about the uniting of two peoples. It is that. It is also the bringing together of two families. And so the family is an important aspect. It should be an important aspect in how you are to choose your future spouse. So I think that there's something to it there. Although logistically, I'm going to have to see with my own children, God willing, how that actually breaks down.
Did you ever try Catholic Match or dating apps?
Yes, I did. And this is going to be funny to your audience, Tasha, but I promise you I wasn't a creep. But I actually messaged you years ago.
Wait a minute. Okay, you know what's funny? I feel like this did happen, but I wasn't 100% sure, because this is the second time out on Catholic Match, and so I have no idea. Like, yeah.
just to show how small the world is, right? This was years before. This is a couple years before I met Jen, so I'm not like double playing Catholic Match or anything. I was on for a little stint, but yes, I did attempt Catholic Match. Went on a couple of get to know you dates. Didn't really find it all that. It wasn't successful for me. I know some people who it's been successful for, but I'm such a turbo sanguine that meeting face to face in that kind of way is probably better anyway.
Where were you living at the time?
I was in Burbank, so I was in Los Angeles.
Yeah. I have been on and off of that site, as well as like some other dating apps. But personally, for me, Catholic Match has not been a good experience. I've met a lot of like interesting, I want to say creepy, not good people.
Yeah.
A couple good ones, but it's unfortunate that there isn't like a better alternative. And
yeah. Well, I gotta say, you didn't even reply to me, so I must have come off as really creepy, but I thought it came off as nice. So
oh no, wait, we didn't message? I feel like we did, but okay, then
now it worked out. All right. I know my wife's gonna be like, "What did you do?" I'm like, "Wait a second, babe." So
so this is hilarious. I will confess that I have the free version, at least now. So they make you wait 10 days to respond to people, and probably read it. I don't know. I do vaguely remember your profile, because I feel like you were in media, and that stood out to me.
I work as a cinematographer and an editor, and I probably would have mentioned that. So
yeah. Well, that's a very, very small world.
It's a small world. And I think as far as like Catholic apps go, or even dating in general, we talked about this a little bit on our podcast, but I think that I've seen churches, for instance, one here in Denver does a really good job about hosting dances, good, modest, but good dances for young adults to really meet each other. And so I think if there's one service for young people, and not in kind of like the boomery Novus Ordo sense, but if there's a genuine service the church ought to do, I do think that the orchestration of social events under the umbrage of the church for people of marrying age is future proofing. And so I think that dioceses really should pay attention to that a lot more, instead of just everyone has like the Catholic Match thing at the end of the bulletin, right? But in the pragmatics of it, or any sort of dating like that, people tend to have pretty negative experiences. So
I mean, I've had ideas about churches having matchmakers, and then the matchmakers like talking to each other, or churches having some sort of a Facebook like app, but
Mm-hmm.
that is somehow connected to the diocese or other dioceses. And then you could even kind of move away from things like Catholic Match and have something where if you're an active churchgoer, you have someone at the church who has like that as their ministry position where they actually kind of verify your identity. They verify that you're Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
verify that you've never been married and that you're free to marry. And I don't know. I don't know what the future of Catholic dating is. Run the Goretti group and we have live events, and I try to have events where people can meet just to create community and maybe something
Mm-hmm.
out of that.
Well, we talk about this on our channel a lot, but we kind of see how we both, Rudy for his wife Ashley and for me with Genevieve, how we kind of fell together, and also the importance of community as Catholics, and especially as traditional Catholics. So I think that there are some sensibilities inherent with the court of traditional mentality. Like it's we by demographics we tend to marry at a higher rate, which is good because I think there's just more discernment there. At the same time, on our channel, we focus particularly on the men's side of it because we're both kind of some jabronis, right? So for me, I went to a swing dance at Our Lady of Mount Carmel.
Find that term, by the way, for our
Oh,
audience.
jabroni. I mean, look, we're not theologians. I wish I could even call myself an amateur church historian, but there's just so much that I haven't read. We're just traditional Catholics, but there's no educational background beyond what our lived experience has been, right? So
That the average trad Catholic is a bit more of a theologian, I would say, than your average like Novus Ordo Catholic. Just
yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree. I think that there's a certain pull, attraction, and tradition that you need to study up. I mean, for our children, they'll be the first generation since our grandparents really who grew up traditional in any remote. And our grandparents' time was just Catholic, right? My grandparents were born in the 1930s. And so for our children, that'll be really exciting for them because there's a lot of fights and steps. Like we all had to read deep into the faith. Our children will have to probably go through those steps, but God willing, in a way lesser sort of extent than we had.
I really want to get I want to ask you about the motu proprio, but I also want to like stay on the dating topic. So I'm going to table motu proprio for now and Latin mass, but we will come back to
that.
So
You had a very good video on it, by the way. May I just say, I enjoyed your video. Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, I read the cover letter and just kind of broke down some thoughts. I recently was in Rome and I was like 2 feet away from Pope Francis.
Were you really?
Not have a chance to ask him about the motu proprio, unfortunately.
Well, you would have been escorted out. I'm surprised that you lasted that long, honestly.
Yeah, well, he was just walking by after his people audience, and
Mm-hmm.
crowd of people, and we heard him speak. So I guess one of the questions I will ask is, how can you give advice to like a young trad man who is trying to
Mm-hmm.
find your wife? I am in a Facebook group called Traditional Catholic Singles, and I do meet a lot of like trad men. I also see a lot of posts that are a bit cringy, and I also
Yep. Meets.
some trad men on Catholic Match who give trads a bad name. So
Mm-hmm.
help a brother out.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep this as concise as possible, but I've narrowed down a couple things. First off, guys, trad or not, the first thing you need to do is get off pornography. And it's not just for the obvious implication that you are literally sending your soul to hell. I mean, which is the fundamental, honestly, but another reason is because literally built up testosterone means that you will actually go out there and talk to women. God made sex and sexuality good. Our natural conclusion to this is marriage and the marital act. If you channel your masculine energy into other routes, your spiritual life, working out, getting some game for heaven's sake, it's going to be a lot easier. Yeah, exactly. The second thing you need to do is what I call killing Dulcinea, which is an important thing for trad men. As trads, I think that there's more of an acceptable understanding of what the masculine and the feminine is, and you should want this in a wife. You should look for a woman who is a woman of proverbs. You look for one that's fit and feminine and cooperative, and one that will be your helpmate. So it's like it's obvious that traditional Catholicism is incompatible with feminism. but also this means that your wife isn't your slave, and she's not just like I think that a lot of guys have this, this dulcinea in their head where, oh well, she's this good pure Catholic girl, but she's also like the fulfillment of all my fantasies, and she's not really a human being or something. It's like, no, marriage is tough. The best part about marriage is living with a woman, which is also the worst part about marriage. And so if you realize that your wife is a sinner as well, and she's a human as well, and that she comes with her own faults and failings, and that together you both can get to heaven, if you look at that, if you understand that in looking for a partner, it's going to be way easier to find one. I think that some trad guys, I think sometimes like we think like, well, we can upgrade, you just kind of look for like the next best. The longer the mantilla is, the better the chick is. And you just gotta do what our ancestors did. You just have to find a good wife and settle. Not settle like oh my gosh, like I'm losing myself, but really just go settle down. Um, that's kind of like the biggest things. I think that there are so many guys out here, and I get it because we live in a world where there is an attack on masculinity, there's an attack on authentic femininity, and it's hard sometimes because there are just notions that we all have. We're all kind of stained with modernism in one sort or another. And so it's kind of hard. Like a lot of guys are like, well, I want to be like the head of household and do this and this. And it's like, that's all well and good. Totally recommend it. But if you're going to do that, here are some steps you need to take to make sure that you're actually a good head. Because it should be just as it should be easy to love your wife. You should also make it easy for your wife to submit to you. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the verses there. So,
I could listen to you talk all day, man. You should have a podcast.
you really think so? I don't know. Maybe.
Okay, so my brain could go in so many directions on what you said. I do want to talk about the killing the Dulcinea complex. For those of you listening who are not familiar with Dulcinea and that cultural reference, which I love because I'm a musical theater person and I was
There
in
it is.
Man of La Mancha. Go read Man of La Mancha by Don Quixote, or go watch the musical, or go YouTube.
Oh, Tasha, no, go read Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Musical theater, people.
Oh, jazz hands. So I think that women also need to take that in too, because women kind of have their idealized version of the ideal trad man or the ideal man, the ideal Catholic man.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he looks so much like Jesus. It's like, girls, there's one Jesus.
Yeah. If you want to marry Jesus, become a nun.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and man is, a flawed creature. Like humans are flawed.
Yeah.
No man is going to be perfect. Hopefully, whoever you marry, you both are striving towards holiness together, and you both are helping each other become saints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that as being married now and kind of seeing this in real time, my wife would certainly agree with this because she talks about this constantly. If you're out there looking for a husband as a woman, it's like you have to be prepared to understand what that actually means. It's not just like the providing kind of side, and it's like if you want your husband to really be a good head of household and a good leader in your family life, like that takes a lot of it's a lot of work to be a wife. Watching my wife work is beautiful, because she works as a behavioral therapist. But she's a wonderful homemaker, and I can't wait for that. Is very clearly her fulfillment when we have children and stuff. I mean, I loved my bachelor pad, but really seeing G.K. Chesterton talks about this, how the woman really is the queen of the home, and it's interesting that like men can build a house, but like watching that cultivate is beautiful. And as a man, like you have to compliment that all the time. It's not just like list of expectations. Honestly, if you respond positively to the feminine, and inversely, if women respond positively to the masculine, these things need to be built up together because our culture is so desperate about tearing that down, right? Satan knows that the family is the integral structure for God's plan. That's why there's a holy family. And so it makes sense why there's such a war between men and women, and Satan revels in that.
Do you think that traditional Catholics or Catholics in general should get off of the apps and get off of even things like Catholic Match, because some would say it's not traditional?
Yeah. I hate to again, I want to caveat that I have met married couples who met on Catholic Match, and so I know that it's possible. I have friends who are engaged right now to be married who met off Catholic Match, so it's possible. But as a normal means, you have to reject the world. And the problem, I think, with dating apps in general is that we turn the opposite sex into a commodity, even if we have holy intentions. It's very easy for a guy to go, okay, well, she's hot, she's hot, she's hot, she's hot, and she pinged me back and had a smiley face. Like, and for women too, you know, you really are just lining up your options. In kind of a more standard courtship kind of style, you should know a little bit about the person you're with because you interact in relatively the same groups. So there's a perfect example of why in-person dating is like the way to go, obviously. So as far as trads are concerned, part of rejuvenating, building back our communities, which is why we talk so much on our channel about guys going out and approaching women, it's because these traditional communities are overpouring with young people. And so if you're so worried about whatever your text is, you want the hit of dopamine because girl from 20 miles away, you know, is chirping at you a little bit, you will really fail to see some of the really great candidates are in front of you there. And so it's a way better discernment process if you just do it in person.
I totally agree. And I think like from the woman's side, you know, someone who's kind of been on and off the apps for years, mostly Catholic Match, but I did dabble in Hinge and a couple others for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it forces you to want to date like a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Very unnatural for me. Like once I've already been like 5 messages in with someone or been
Right.
on a few dates with them, I'll get other messages and I feel like I don't even really want to read those because I'm kind of attached to this person and I'm hoping things work out. And then maybe they don't work out, but now it's like, ooh, do I go back to that person who messaged me
Mm-hmm.
months ago and be like, hey, you know, and it becomes like kind of a weird thing where a lot of women will say, you know, keep your options open, date multiple
Mm-hmm.
people, but you can't really do that for so long. And you can't really do that if you're trying to like discern marriage with someone. So
Right.
I think that if we all moved away from that and into our communities, we would be better served. I also think that a lot of times you get messages from people who live just all the way across the world or across the country.
Right.
It's very hard to line up compatibility in day to day, especially when you have so many factors stacked against you anyways with that. Not that it's impossible to date long distance. I'm going to a friend's wedding and they were long distance their whole relationship
Mm-hmm.
and they connected through Instagram, so it's possible, but it does present another layer of like complexity.
Yeah. Yeah. There is something about proximity. We know this. We know proximity to work just as much as we know proximity to our home life and what we want. Proximity to our churches. Benedict option outlines that a lot. And I think that in the future, that's essentially what happens. When Jen and I finally buy a foreclosed home because the housing market will crash, God willing, hopefully we'll be able to be close to our parish because that's a consideration. We don't want to move any place that doesn't have the Latin Mass. And so, yeah, I think that,
Are you attending?
I'm sorry.
Are you attending an XP or an FSSP or an SSPX right now? Or
We're attending an FSSP parish,
oh,
Our Lady Mount Carmel here in Denver, which is one of the biggest of the fraternity in the States. There's an SSPX really close by, actually, just kind of, well, I guess like 20 minutes away, but Colorado's all driving and stuff. But Colorado's kind of cool because there's a lot of these traditional hotbeds and things are interested. It's very different than San Francisco and it's very different than Los Angeles. Very so.
why did you move from California to Colorado and not to a red state?
Okay, first off, lady, you're living up in the Bay Area, so don't even at me right now. I'm from Colorado also. I grew up here. And so Colorado is a swing state that obviously it says it's becoming more blue. Southern Colorado is pretty sane where I'm from. I'm from a land hicktown middle of nowhere. So I got a job at the Augustine Institute back here. And I think that's where God wants me to be. And also I'm back home and I have my bride and a camera. So not doing bad.
Weston Institute is a great place to be, and that seems like a perfect fit. So just kind of busting your chops on the Colorado thing.
Oh, I'm terribly offended. Terribly offended. Tasha, I want to know what is your dating status? Because if you're single, I can hook you up with plenty of eligible bachelors here. Colorado is a trad hotbed for a reason. I'm telling you.
Oh man, maybe we will chat about that later.
Okay. Miss, I could ask you whatever.
I'll be honest. I started seeing someone and I'm interested, but we've only been on one date. So
Okay.
it's very early. We'll see what happens.
Nice.
Um, dating is really hard. Dating's been very hard for me. I've probably seen it all. I've really seen it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that makes me super reluctant about anything online and just in general. But I don't want to make it about me, but that's my dating has been a
Oh,
difficult.
look at that.
I
Oh.
think a lot of my friends have said they don't know anyone who has had as many crazy experiences, and they say that with all seriousness. And
Time to start a blog.
I'm like, yeah, it's a telenovela over here. I don't know. Okay, so what advice would you give to a young trad lady? Because you know us
Ooh.
women love to be told what to do by men.
Well, actually, that's part of the problem. I'm just kidding. Again, I think that there is a beauty in femininity. And I think that even women with the best of intentions, I see, because with my fiance, I saw it in real time. Jen was working in the top echelons of the restaurant world in Los Angeles. These sort of professions, just like cinematography, tend to bring out your masculine side more. And they're long hours or grueling hours. And we live in a culture that tells you that the highest priority you can give is your work. This is part of the great destruction of femininity that happened in the sexual revolution and the third wave feminism, that sort of thing. So as a traditionalist woman, I will say this: if you really want to put yourself out for marriage, put yourself out for marriage. You might find a couple weirdos, that's granted. That's a whole world of navigation of women that guys don't have to deal with because we're the ones doing the asking. But there's a power of discernment that's given, and I think that there's a lot of really good guys. But as you said, I think the most important thing is to recognize that not all, like, men are, we're not carbon copies of Jesus or Saint Joseph. A good man, a man that you want to be with, is a man who will always try to fail up. He will always try to when he says Saint Joseph and our Lord are the perfect examples of masculinity, he actually means it. And so, ladies, like, you've been created because it's not good for man to be alone. Like, we need each other. A woman was created as a helpmate for man. And I think that a woman who is worth her weight in gold, who is a perfect wife, it's an immeasurable treasure. She'll be off the market real fast because men of value ought to know that she has value. So yeah, you can really make some discernment. You don't have to waste your time on low rent men. Go out there and say what you want, but also don't have such unrealistic expectations. And you should be okay. Prayer. But again, the last thing is, again, just on femininity again, is like, my wife has made a decision recently, and it was to really just try just kind of the whole skirt dress game. And men treat you differently when you act feminine. This is true. If you're out there and you're masculine all the time, it's no wonder you're not going to get approached, because we're not looking for another dude, honestly. And so if you're really out there about your business, you will try to model, just as men ought to model St. Joseph, you will try to model Our Lady. And plenty of those other great lady saints who are married, St. Monica, a perfect example. And, the rest will take care of itself. It should, honestly, because there are plenty of trad guys out here. In fact, we outnumber trad ladies, according to, the scale's a little tipped male favor, unlike in the Novus Ordo, where, sorry, probably should become a nun, sister.
Can attest to that. There's definitely been a lot of younger men at traditional Latin Mass environments, I've noticed, than the Novus Ordo circles, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that it's because the Latin Mass draws like a sense of masculinity to it that often Novus Ordo services don't have. And that is nothing against the Novus Ordo. I attend Novus Ordo right now more than I attend Latin Mass. So yeah, and I can't speak too much on the Latin Mass Novus Ordo controversy or whatever.
Well, I won't scandalize your audience, but there is something to that. I mean, we were talking about this with a buddy the other day, but when you think about the priest, what the role of the priest is in Latin Mass, it's funny. As a man, they start this with altar boys very young. It's military regimented precision, and it just oozes masculinity and fatherhood. For whatever reason, and I have a couple speculations, but again, for whatever reason, in fact, there have been just times where, like, real men who want to go into the priesthood, if it was a place like St. John's Seminary in my beloved LA, they were weeded out. And so I think that if you're a man and you're really struggling in your faith and trying to figure it out, there are elements, particular in the new Mass, that are not going to speak to you as much. And inversely, as a lady, like, I think you look around sometimes and realize that Susan from the parish council is a real thing. And it's hard if you're a young lady really looking for an authentic man to kind of discern with. Sometimes it can be difficult because they might not be there.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think it's hard too because like you said earlier, we've all been tainted by modernism, and I think that that can often cloud our judgment and how we evaluate each other for better or for worse. I also totally agree with like the first thing you said, advice for men about getting off pornography. I would also give advice for women: get off of pornography, get off of reading romance novels, get off of,
Mm,
you know, Twilight, the equivalent of that.
yeah.
Even like reality TV, be mindful of the music you listen to and the
Ooh,
company that
yeah.
you keep. I would also say if you do go to college, I wouldn't recommend joining a sorority. I really wouldn't. I was not in a sorority, but I feel that the culture isn't really about building true sisterhood. It's really about like getting drunk, hooking up with guys,
Hmm.
acting promiscuous, kind of being slutty, just being honest. And it's like
Yeah.
there's better alternatives. Now, this isn't to say every sorority is like that, and I'm sure that there are some that don't embody that culture at different colleges, but I would be very cautious with those decisions because that's going to form your character. And you could be around great men in college who might see you differently if they think of you as like, oh, she's a sorority girl, she goes to these frat parties.
There is something to inside what makes woman woman. There's something to a woman's honor, which is it's different than a man's. Um, I tend to think that in our world of double standards, there's some double standards that you just have to accept, you know? And so for women in particular, I think that as for men, it's like, well, what's your end goal? If a man wants to be married and he wants to really give his wife the option of being a homemaker, for instance, then he needs to make sure that he's making enough money and all these other kind of things to provide. This is the age-old story. For ladies, the inverse. If your desire really is motherhood and to be a homemaker or something like that, then it's a good time to really discern what does taking 20, 30, 40, $50,000 worth of student loan debt for something you're not going to use beyond. And it's not the only way to meet men of high character and of high value. Um, because men don't judge women by what they're earning. Men judge them by how good of helpmates they genuinely are, how good of wives, authentically, as the Bible puts it. Which is why the Bible is so good about talking about how really genuinely true a woman's worth is, especially when she's conformed to God in the role of motherhood and wife. I mean, it's amazing, and it's also why the Bible says for men that it's better to live alone than to share, a house with a quarrelsome woman, which is completely true. In verse, I'm sure.
And I think it's like the nag of a quarrelsome wife or a contentious wife is like the drip 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 of a faucet.
Yeah, the drip drip drip. It's funny, and it's like again, Father Ripperger says this, right? For all the sins you can laugh with Eve at, Adam committed more, right? So it's a little tongue in cheek, because
Yeah.
because the question was, right, like where was Adam when Eve committed the sin? You think he was just like off law to dine, or was he right beside his wife? I'm like, dang, that's completely true. Yeah, that's fair. So
And either way, I mean, I think he was la di da, but even if he was by her, that's very interesting that it's like, you know, yeah. So, okay. So moving on to like another topic, what have you learned since you were married? What advice would you give to yourself beforehand, like kind of now that you know what this thing is that you were striving
yeah.
for so long?
Oh man. So let's see. What I've learned, I think the biggest thing I've learned is that marriage is a full-time job. I mean, you hear it all your life. It's a vocation, it's a vocation. But until you're actually married, you don't actually know what that means. Because majority of your time with your spouse is not spent in bed. It's not spent cuddling. It's not spent snuggling. It's spent working. It's spent trying to fix a car, and it's spent determining who's sick and who needs to go to the hospital. And also, when you take your marital vows, you have to realize that one of you will bury the other. And so there's a great gravity that I think that our culture, especially, really likes the idea of a very watered down version of love. It's all just emotionalism. I looked through the entirety of my marriage vows, and the only time love is mentioned is as the perennial virtue that God is love. Marriage is a sacrifice of duty. That's what makes it a sacrament. It's the incidence of marriage, of course, is that it is fulfilling for husband and wife, that it makes you happy, but the ultimate end of marriage isn't just like a sort of human based happiness. So that's like the biggest thing I've learned, that because we don't go to separate quarters at the end of the night like we did when we were engaged, communication so much more key. being coordinated, learning how to combine everything, learning how to genuinely share our lives, learning how to really be flesh of our flesh and bone of our bone. That's important. As for something that I would have wished I would have told myself, it's funny, I have this in stages. If I could go back to Jordan at the beginning of the world, I would have said, you can go to a dance with a girl, but who cares about any of these because your wife's out there in the ether. Probably would have gone to California earlier, but fate has its fate. But honestly, there's just so many instances of sin, and not just of sin, of course, but just of where you realize it just wasn't your vocation, where you just go, wow, this was all really nothing. I could have spent that time and saved some money and done all this other kind of stuff instead. And the more immediate, I think I would have really told myself, especially in the engagement process, that the most important thing is the sacrament. That's something that we really tried our hardest to prioritize. But there were just entire wedding preparation things that I would have just let go of completely. It's if it was up to me, we would have just like had a small little social after mass in the parish hall and we would have been off. There's no reason that we spend so much time, effort, all this other kind of stuff for a wedding reception if it's to the neglect of the actual importance of the sacrament. I think that Jen and I did it right, but there are just so many things that were all straw at the end of the day.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the importance of the sacrament and how you think maybe like large weddings or something that's like more about the party takes away from the importance of the sacrament?
Yeah, and I think that it's funny. My tongue-in-cheek thing is that weddings weren't made for men, because if they were, they would be a quarter of the price and they'd be done a lot faster. When my grandparents got married, they got married in a small town, and after their wedding, the band played them over to one of their parents' house. They had some refreshments and then played them off to the dance hall, and that was it. It was nice and simple. A lot of times for couples, we have such an industry around weddings that their first decree as husband and wife is to go 10, 20, $30,000 in debt together, which is horrible. And they spend so much time about the day of, oh, it's the only part of the thing, that they don't spend enough time in pre-Cana reading and actually discerning that this is a vocation. So when all the feelings of the honeymoon wear off, they're left trying to meld their lives together and realizing that they have a lot more ways to go. That's, I think, why a lot of people describe the first year of marriage as the most challenging. It's going to be challenging combining your life anyway with somebody. But if Jen and I really enter this saying, this is my spouse, like this is the one who's going to help me get to heaven. And I've been really meditating on, as a man, like you have to learn to die for your wife. And it's not just if a burglar breaks in, as husband, it is your duty to go kill that burglar. But it's like, hey, maybe she would like me to like cook dinner tonight. She looks a little overwhelmed. Or, hey, like this is an interesting one. If your wife's a stay-at-home wife, especially, and you go to work and you come back, you're her first adult interaction all day. And so she's going to want to tell you about her day. And as a husband, like you need to listen. And that's a way that you die to your spouse, even though you don't really care. Oh, the kid got a little jello on him or whatever. Like that's important. And so if you go into the mentality like that more, then everything else is really just straw. I mean, you really end up paying a lot of money to really put on a party for other people. And I get that, like, we have this whole thing where it's important. Weddings are important. There are customs and rituals that are important. It is your big day and you only get married once, especially as trads. But there's just so much. It's like you can't make that to the detriment of what your actual sacramental life is going to be with your spouse.
It's so funny because I think that when men go to work and they come home, they kind of want like peace, like
Yeah.
maybe quiet, and to eat and to just, but the woman, it's like she's been building it up all day, of like, I can't wait to talk to my husband about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has to be a balance, right? I think that, women should recognize like your husband might want some space when he first comes in. Like I remember when my dad would come home, like I would even have a lot I wanted to say to him. And he'd be like, let me go change first. Like go,
Uh-huh.
like, give me some space. Give me a minute. Like I can't answer your questions right now.
Right.
Be like, give me a minute, and I would like kind of learn, like you can say hi, but don't be like dad and then this and then that and then
This is a funny kind of thing, because I hear this sometimes from from the husbands of my work sometimes, where it's like, the weekend becomes a chore list, which is fine. Like as a man, like there's even we don't have kids yet or anything. We're living in an apartment. Man, there's always stuff to do. Just like running a household with your wife, there's a lot of stuff to do. We built a little fort for the dog the other day because the dog was a little sick. It's like, oh, got to do this. So I think you're completely right. Coming home, you just need a time to decompress. And the inverse is true of your wife. And so it's like working out the balance. When we have children, like your wife's gonna want a moment where she's like I've been hanging out with these guys all day. Like, can I like kind of just like take a beat? And so for me, it's really important. Like if Jen wants to talk about something, she works with children right now, so she loves just talking about kids. You know, it's beautiful to see. And even if I'm like, oh yes, 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 like that's an example of dying to your spouse. I'm never like, give me 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, if this kind of is something I'm like, then offer it up. Literally, there's your purgatory time right off for the day.
I love that. And I love talking about kids too. Whoever I like date, now that I'm a teacher, I do tend to talk about my students a lot. I love
Uh
talking
huh.
about my students, and that's very important to me. So I totally can relate to that. Okay, so we kind of gave some advice for men. We gave some advice for women. I'm wondering, what advice would you give to people who are not really sure what we're talking about when we talk about traditional Catholicism and how like
Mm,
culturally it's very different than Novus Ordo Catholicism? It's very different than just regular old religion or Christianity or whatever people have in mind. Like, how can they go about exploring or even understanding this? What might be appealing about this rigid way of life? I think there's freedom in it, but it's definitely
hmm
a process to get into.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're not faking it. That's a helpful thing. If we've noticed that if the church chases after the culture, everyone winds up miserable. As the church goes, so goes the world. So we've noticed that there has been a rise of loneliness, of unhappiness, of existential dread, of atheism, of all the horrid isms of our day. And with traditional Catholicism, it says something that's completely opposite to the world post Enlightenment and post French Revolution. The belief it's a rejection of liberalism in this. Catholicism says this about human nature: human nature does not change fundamentally. When God, the way that God created man is the way man has been for these thousands of years. That there are certain truths that he will always find and revolve around, and as a result the faith needs to be built upon these perennial truths. Christ himself, therefore, is the way, is the truth, is the life. And him giving authority to St. Peter, to give authority to the entirety of the apostles to bind and loose upon this earth, means that there are just certain dogmas and doctrines for the sake of your salvation that you have to ascribe to. Not because we're rigid and pharisaical, but because that they are laws of love. I use this analogy for marriage. Love is extraordinarily exclusive. Love is giving yourself openly to one person. But because I love Genevieve, I can't go talk to other women. That's how love is. I mean, God talks about this with Israel. He says, I am a jealous God. He has a people. He actually had marks of people. And he's now given that mark to the church. So when you realize these perennial truths about our Father who loves us, it makes sense that in the liturgy, in devotions, in the way that we speak, in the way that we dress, we're not living for this world, that we're messengers, ambassadors of a kingdom far greater than anything here. So I would say the appeal to traditional Catholicism is the fact that you have a lifeline literally to your ancestors. And your ancestors are not tied to a language or to an ethnic group or something. Your ancestors are tied to the one true church. So it's not weird when a traditional Catholic in particular says, oh yes, the persecutions that happened with the Cristeros or with the Japanese martyrs or with the Roman martyrs thousands of years ago. It's not like, oh wow, they're not your people. They actually are. In contrast to this, I just think that if we pursue very worldly ideas, if we try to engage the world in a way that's not above the culture, but kind of a product of the culture, it's no wonder that there's such great confusion in the church. That there are entire swaths of the church which seem to be an open rebellion to what the historical teachings of Christ and his church have always been. So if someone's on the outside of traditional Catholicism, maybe they don't know anything about the faith. Maybe they go into the Novus Ordo and they just have a very lukewarm basis of the faith. Maybe they're trad and they just haven't delved deeper. This is such a beautiful wellspring that Christ wants for our salvation. And so diving in, understanding that we just have to humble ourselves in order to be like God, that's the end goal. That's the message.
I still got to get you one of my Save the Trads t-shirts with the Jesus.
No, you never did.
I never did. Did you send me?
Wow.
I'll look back in the messages. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
This podcast is over.
I haven't sent one to like 3 of the people. Like I haven't sent it to anyone, all of the people who I said I would send it to. because I was going to, and then I found out I was going to go to Rome, and then my
Hey.
priorities were on that. But I'm going to order some and I will send. I am wondering too, what do you see as the future of the Latin Mass in the Catholic Church, especially with the latest motu proprio?
With the latest move appropriate, yeah, we're gonna have to definitely do that one, aren't we? Isn't it interesting that uh, a time where we hear all this time about dialoguing and listening to the people, that when the people vote with their feet, it has to be cramped down by decrees on high. Well, the Latin Mass is going to grow. It's going to be fine. And the reason why it's going to be fine is because it is the Mass of the ages. This is the Mass that converted the entirety of the Roman Empire. This is the Mass that converted the pagan north of Germany and Scandinavia and Britain. This is the Mass that was brought to Africa and to Asia. This is the Mass that converted the continent of South America. This is a Mass that reached deep into the heart of North America, far beyond New Mexico into the Canadian territories. So how is it that despite supposedly being such an archaic relic, that there's such a wellspring there? How is it that all these young people and these families are recognizing the way that the Lord is calling them? I think that we're going to go through a horrid persecution. We already are at the doorstep of it. I think that it's going to suck. I don't know quite what it's going to look like. I imagine it's going to be some disbandment of some very legitimate things. And there'll be Catholics all over the empire, the effects of this great divorce, who are going to try to make sense of it. And it's probably just going to go underground because everyone knows that the coolest Christians are always in jail. So it's going to suck for a time, but it's not going to stop growing. It can't stop growing. And it's because if you look at even conversations like this is like mainstream Catholicism right now, as far as the internet's concerned. There are not a lot of podcasts where two people are sitting down going, well, my grandma's Novus Ordo is so great and you should come. And it's not just to hate on the Novus Ordo or fellow Catholics in that sort of way, but as we live in a culture that's so confused about its identity, and confused about who God is, it makes sense that this is such a bastion against all the evils of our world. So, that's why we're glad trads. Sometimes the world can seem dark, sometimes it can be grim, but there was a homily on Census Fidelity the other day I listened to, and the priest's main line was that it comes from an IRA prisoner, and it says, "Our revenge will be in the laughter of our children." And at least judging by demographics, the flip is going to happen in 15 to 20 years anyway. So, yeah, don't be worried. Whatever.
That is very powerful. So, are you not a rad trad?
No, we have moments. I think that there are some, I will say this. I have some opinions that I'm sure are curious. I don't know if I have anything that's particularly outside the scope of what traditionalists kind of think. I do tend to think that there are some problems inside the documents of Vatican II, but I agree with every anathema and dogma promulgated at the Second Vatican Council, for instance. The more that I read about Archbishop Lefebvre and the SSPX, the more I think that we are all trying to reconcile a great divorce that the church never should have put upon us. But Lefebvre was not a schismatic. Even by the rubrics, not rubrics, even by canon law, just straight legal, he was in a schismatic, and his life proves that. I think that I'd rather have even a watered down Protestantized mass than no mass at all. But I do think there is something to say that exposure to the Novus Ordo over long periods of time leads to great swaths of the faith being lost. That's evident. So I'm not a rad trad. And I think that as we've seen, especially under the pontificate of Pope Francis, there are forces of evil in the church. And we need to start being what we're doing right now. We need to be loud and boisterous for the sake of our Lord. And then also we need to be able to go our own way and live the life that Christ wants us to live inside our communities. Which is why I'm saying that it's so nice that like all these little Latin mass communities are like, fine, we'll just stay over here and we'll just have babies. And one day we'll wake up and the church will be, singing Sanctus again.
I'm sure people have asked you this. What is it like being a Black Latin Mass Catholic or just being a Black American Catholic today?
Totally recommend David Gray for this one too, because he's very, very good on this topic. He has a theory that race doesn't exist, and I think that's true. So you can have different experiences based upon all the human characteristics you can put in. How God looks at us is interesting. You'll notice that God doesn't discuss race when he brings all the nations together. He discusses culture, and historically culture has usually been tied to how people look differently.
Okay.
but God made humanity. And so when he describes us, God only sees us as Jews and Gentiles, and then, created that. So I will say this, that it makes sense why the Latin Mass is in Africa too. I don't think that I don't think, except for the forces that really want to divide us, I think it'd be very silly to look at the Latin Mass as just a product of white European imperialism. It doesn't make any sense in its history. These terms don't even exist when Latin Mass was promulgated thousands of years ago. There's no problem. My wife is half white, half black. I'm black. There are a couple other peoples. I understand that by demographics, Black Latin Mass Catholics make up 1% of the population. Not surprising, since Blacks are 13% of the U.S.'s population. But
I should buy a shirt that says "I am the 1%."
you know what? You honestly should, and it should just be a picture of some black saints doing mass. But there's more, right? But that's a funny thing. So I really think that as the church goes to hell in a handbasket, or as the modernist forces really attack, well, we're going to discover what we're already discovering, that the faith isn't built upon ethnic divides, right? We're not the Orthodox. The faith is built upon something that literally bridges these sorts of gaps. And if we keep picking at these scabs over and over again, then we're not going to get anywhere. That's what Satan wants us to do. Genuinely, he wants us divided in this way. But I just look at Catholics as my brothers. And when I looked at Jen, it was nice that Jen's a nice little mocha color. But my most important trait was that I needed a good Catholic wife. And I think that plenty of people look like that too.
Going back to realization since marriage, what is something you feel like you know now more about women, or maybe even just more about your wife? You've been married. Do you feel like we're less mysterious?
Wow, no, definitely not. Tasha, this is fire. No. Okay, so let me tell you, first off, I will admit it's funny to see, but I get that it's a lot of work to be a woman. I see it. It's
Yes.
Oh, there it is. See, that's your Californian talking right there. Oh, you guys are so self-congratulatory. Oh my gosh, it is so hard. Like, I'm just playing, but no, it really is a lot of work. Like, listen, Jen's working, Jen's homemaking, and then Jen also looks pretty. That takes upkeep, and as a husband, you have to be attentive to that. We just had this whole thing. We just have all these really different insights, and it's so interesting seeing it in real time, like watching her get ready in the morning. Once upon a time was a mortal sin when we were engaged, so I didn't do it. Now it's like, that's a lot. That's cool. That's a lot. That's some steps. That's really interesting. So I guess what I've realized about women is that I think that putting your best foot forward is really nice for men, because I think that it makes men more apt to really serve you. This is why, even though I said killing Dulcinea, I think I have a very quixotic way about me. I love how all Don Quixote wants to do is serve Lady Dulcinea to the end of his days. And I call Genevieve my Dulcinea because I say that just today, she had a terrible migraine, and I came home and she was like, well, I just want to clean the house a little bit. And I was like, hey, don't do that. Put everything down, go take a rest. I don't need, if you're in this kind of thing, I'm not a tyrant. That's stupid. It's my house too. I get to clean stuff if I want to clean stuff. You get to rest when you want to rest. So it's just learning that push and pull. And also, I will say this: women are different than men. They are different than men. And again, you need to really understand this. They're different in a lot of different ways about themselves. And that includes appetites. So you can't just eat cereal every night if you're a bro. Bachelor pad life was wonderful, but Jen's a chef, so whatever. And if she has a headache, she has a headache. So, but when she doesn't, she doesn't. So hey.
Yes, women are different than men. And I think that we've focused a lot in modernism on our sameness. And we've totally forgotten, no, we're different. We're complementary. We're not.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's beautiful. And this is what, especially in traditional Catholicism, I really like. It's our most powerful saint is Our Lady. Our Lady, who was under the submission of Saint Joseph, But so the most powerful saint is a woman who is the most feminine, beautiful, wonderful woman who ever lived. We don't need, again, ladies don't need to be guys. If they try to, they become bad guys. And the opposite is true too, which is why we have a word called effeminacy for men who are just essentially bad ladies.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. we need to bring back masculinity. And one of the focuses of this ministry is talking about authentic femininity and authentic masculinity and what that means and what that looks like. So a couple more questions.
Yeah, let's go.
These ones I stole from Tim Ferriss a while
Mm-hmm.
back. If you had a billboard with a message, what would the message be?
That's a good one. Um, Jesus loves you and his church needs you. And it would have a picture of the elevation of the Latin Mass.
Right.
Because that's a quintessential truth that Jesus loves you. He came to the world not to condemn the world, but to save the world. He founded a church that that the gates of hell will not prevail against, and that he wants you in those kind of ranks. And if you choose your entire life to not be in those ranks, then your judgment will have that taken into account, whatever that means. But it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and you really should become Catholic. We also have really pretty women, so hey.
Oh, I have heard some things that some Catholic men have said the Protestant women are more beautiful than the Catholic women. And I've heard of people ragging on the women. That's what I'm saying. These men.
Can I be candid for a second? This is what I love about Catholicism, right? And my wife's a testament to this. My wife's a blend of things. But you're telling me that a world that a religion that spread across the entire globe, like this is the problem with Protestantism. If you're going to like Lutheranism, you're going to marry a German woman, which is fine, right? But you have homogenous pools. Catholicism is like Irish, South American, Mexican, right? Like Japanese, like whatever you want, Nigerian, like take your pick.
Everything.
Look, I know that there was a lot of terrible atrocities committed in the destruction of the New World, but not everything was atrocities. You know that a couple conquistadors are like, "Whoa, she looks way different than my Isabella back home."
Oh yes, oh yes, and different is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, we're all one race, babies, or whatever.
Okay, next question: which book do you most recommend others read?
A couple different camps. I would say that if you're Catholic, you need to read Imitation of Christ. Thomas Kempis. That's what I'm reading right now.
What? I think I literally just put that in my bag. I'm going to Idaho tomorrow. That's my plain reading. I got it last night.
Good lady.
Religious hippie advocated for it, and my friend Emeka. And I read the first like little chapter last night, and it was about like rejecting the world,
Mm-hmm.
And, I felt called out on a lot of things. I was like,
that's huge.
But I like my makeup, but I like my possessions, but I like my worldly things. I like or whatever.
It's vanity of vanity. All things are vanity. It's like God created these things as beautiful. They ought to be enjoyed. As trads, we should look good, but it's like it should all serve a higher purpose. And one thing that Kempis wrote this, and I'm towards the end, and it's beautiful. And he goes like this: Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Without the way, there is no going. Without the truth, there is no knowing. Without the life, there is no living. And so that's been like my meditation for this week, because that's that book. And as like a prideful sanguine, that book is always knocking me down a peg, which is beautiful. So as a Catholic, like that is essential spiritual reading. You will go to hell if you don't read it. Got him. So
yes. Okay. What invention, or not invention, what possession under $100 have you purchased recently that really positively impacted your life? Could be silly, could be serious.
I'm looking around my room because I feel like I have an answer. Impacted my life. What a curious thing. Invention. Okay, well, I guess I can show. This isn't like the most recent purchase, but it's important. Where is it? Oh. Okay. So this is called a rocket blower. This is particularly used on camera lenses. Just quintessential cinematography 101. It cleans off dust. Also, it's really fun to tease your wife with. So she can be like doing something, you can just kind of sneak around and go, yeah, exactly. We've been sanding the heck out of this bar cart because Catholics can drink, of course. And I didn't have any canned air, so this came in handy too. So I would just recommend it if you have cats or pets or children, Quito.
I was gonna make a joke, or politicians. I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, they're gonna need something a little stronger.
Holy water in there.
I'm sorry that the Holy Father granted Nancy Pelosi an audience instead of you. I know that it was came down between you or her.
I'm
And
sorry too. I think my father actually wrote an article. He loves to write like opinion pieces, and I think
what does he write?
he sent it to me today, and I have not read it yet. But the title of his email was like, "Just so you know, I still like to pop off every now and then," and it was like about that. I'm sure because he writes about when he's not been happy about that. He's not been happy about that.
We all go to our eternal rewards. That's been my entire quote for my entire life and a life of other. We all go to our eternal. We get what we deserve.
I'm hoping that Pope Francis was evangelizing to her, and I'm going to leave it at that.
You know what? I do too. I do too.
What is your favorite failure? Sometimes you failed and you were like, oh, but this was actually a really good thing.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. Oh, that's good. Well, I was gonna say my marriage, but that's not true. My marriage is great. But in a way that is. Listen, it's like I told Jen, this is important.
Die to yourself.
This is important. If you're discerning a woman, you cannot just pick a woman who you can love with. You need to pick one you can fight with. Um, and there's so many fights in and outside of marriage that are preventable. And sometimes like you wade into one, you're like, how did I get here? Sometimes you pick a fight. But it's gonna sound funny, but I would not want to be with anyone but my wife. And so for all the times I poked the hornet's nest and all the times that she's poked the hornet's nest, I tell her, especially like when we're making up afterwards, I'm like, this is funny, but like I wouldn't want to fight with anyone else but you because we're not very good at it. We're both kind of, I'm a sanguine, so I just want to like get it out and be happy in 5 minutes. She becomes melancholic, so she just kind of wants to like withdraw and just be done with it. So it's a very awkward little dance that we do.
I like that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
might have said.
Any questions for myself?
Oh, now the questions for yourself.
You were trying to grill me earlier, and I was like,
Well, you know what, Tasha, this just means you'll have to come on our podcast where you can sit in the hot gates and have to answer all the questions.
I'd love to. Please have me on. Please have me on. And if you're ever in the Bay or if I'm ever out your way, I'd love to meet you in person. And thank you so
Yes.
much for taking your time again to come on. Everyone who's watching, please go listen to the Glad Trad podcast. You can also watch him on YouTube. And please like, subscribe, and comment to the Goretti group on Instagram or on YouTube. Thank you so much. And we hope that you have a wonderful day. We hope that you stay close to Christ and come home to the Catholic Church. All right. Thank you.